Yes.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to another episode of Pages to Progress. Here in this episode, we are in chapter 3. If you've been following us on the book that we have been working through, Dee, if you don't mind just holding up the book for me, the book that we are working through is Troubling the Water by
Dude,
Ben
I thought I had it upside down.
McBride. Yeah, you got it. You got it. Trouble in the Water by Ben McBride. Um, and it certainly has been a little troubling experience as we've got to chapter 3. I am here with Darlene,
Got
with
it.
Jessica, and Annabelle. Thanks for joining us. We're just gonna take some time to reflect on chapter 3, entitled "Build a Bridge." So let's start off with this basic question and see where we go with this. You've read the chapter, you've had your thoughts. What do you think? How would you define bridge building for yourself? I'm going to start with that question. Who wants to have a crack?
Okay, I can go.
Go for it.
Okay.
Question. It's a
I
big question,
yeah.
yeah.
I'm just gonna speak from my experience. Bridge building is when you bring two parties together and and like act as a mediator really, and bring those two very opposing, at times very opposing, um, parties together to a point where they're able to let go of their opposing views, put it down for a minute, put it down, and be able to listen to the other person
Hmm.
and be able to consider the other person's perspective and their experiences and situations, and come to an understanding where they can either continue to disagree, or rather, better yet, come to a point of, in all goodness, and the best scenario would be in reconciliation.
Hmm.
That'll be the best scenario.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
interesting as I read the chapter and I thought about bridge building, I thought about the word compassion. I was speaking with a friend of mine. She's Catholic and very into etymology, and the idea of the word compassion, when you Latin root word goes back to this idea of fellowship. And, the strength that can happen when you have fellowship with another group or another person, the process of bridge building, it's not one thing, it is truly a process.
Hmm.
The idea that the the Christian individual, and I know I'm jumping around, but the idea that as an individual, our minds get stuck we can easily get stuck in the weeds. We can easily become very individualistic in our thought process, very self-centered in our thought process. And the idea of compassion in terms of basically building a fellowship, practicing like, almost like going to the gym
Hmm.
and,
Hmm.
and practicing, and building upon a certain belief together, if that makes
Hmm.
any sense. It made me think about, so there's some Sabbaths where my daughter might be at her father's home, and I think to myself, okay, Sabbath is for man. I, I need to need to recuperate. But in actuality, the idea that going to church and having that fellowship is allowing my very selfish oriented brain to come together and practice in the Word of God,
Mm.
practice in the fellowship of God. Um, I know I'm jumping around there, but
No,
there's
you're
this
good.
very intimate idea of bridge building when I think about it, as he discussed it.
Mm, mm, mm. Hmm. Any thoughts, Jessica?
Okay. To me, bridge building it's about creating connections with humility and empathy. It's not about fixing or changing someone.
Mm,
It's about understanding their experiences, being present, and recognizing my own privilege and to support and uplift others or uplift them.
mm,
And that's what I got from the chapter. That's how I understood, and to me, how I understood the when he talks about bridge building, like
mm,
how he did it, how and he approached it with humility and empathy and trying to understand that sometimes you just need to be quiet and listen.
mm,
And when like someone asking for help, realizing because of his privilege and he has never gone through something,
Yeah.
mm.
he didn't know how to help.
Yeah. As I reflected on his experience as a pastor, it really resonated with me as also someone who's a pastor. And you got the word right there, humility, in the respect that there are so many times, because I would say that my job is fundamentally built on bridge building. um, but he shared an experience where when he approached an individual, he had to tell himself to stop leading and start listening.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I resonated with that because there are too many times where I walk into a room with my hat as a pastor and I immediately assume that I am coming from a place of leadership to teach everyone else about something, whatever it is, theological, non-theological, it doesn't matter. I immediately step in thinking to myself, I don't think it's intentional, but it is kind of subliminal. I'm better than you. I know more than you, whatever it is. And I think he really he did me well because I took a step back and thought, I wonder what bridge building would look like if I took more time to recognize I have something to gain from this interaction from someone else and something to learn and grow from and something that this person could potentially teach me. Um, I do see bridge building coming together of individuals who may have diametrically opposed opinions, but I think bridge building is about trying to facilitate a space where people can see each other's humanity. And I think it's trying to get people to share that commonality in who they are without negating their strong belief about whatever it is, even if the belief, in your opinion, could be offensive or difficult to take on. I think we're all struggling with this question because we all recognize the challenges of what it takes to be a bridge builder and put down your need to defend and embrace your need to see someone.
I don't think but so in the examples that he offered,
Hmm.
for example, his friend who was like Bill, and then he talks about Jabari.
Hmm.
Um,
The pastor and the Jabari was the young man.
yes, exactly. The first one was, a man who was basically leveraging his own privilege and power,
Hmm.
right, to assist, you know, in a group that that, were themselves not protected in some way.
Mm.
Jabari was a guy that the two individuals, there is this assumption
Mm.
that, you should know what I'm going through. But, the pastor had to sit down and take a look back and say, hang on here, even though we come from the same community, once again, there is this process that needs to happen here
Mm.
in terms of me learning from you and learning how best I can help you.
Mm. Yeah. And I think it's just accepting that process when we come into contact with people. Bridge building, at least from what I understood from this chapter, and as I continue to ruminate on it, it requires really tapping into empathy. And I realize empathy is another big term that sometimes we can assume that we fully can understand what it is. I'm curious to find out what you all feel about how would you define empathy and how does that relate to bridge building. He talked about, you know, this notion of trying to essentially, how can I describe it? Um, hold space with someone, and I feel like that requires a huge amount of empathy. Any thoughts on that?
Um, okay, so what you're asking is what is empathy to us, or
Yeah,
like how do we perceive it?
yeah.
Uh, to me, it's understanding. I'm not gonna be able to understand 100% what the other person is going through,
Mm,
but it's about. I'm not gonna understand it 100%, but I feel for you. I feel
you sorry, you what?
I feel for you. I feel your pain. I was like kind of like I don't know how to explain it. It is hard because I'm very, very like empathetic person. Like I feel for other people. I feel when they suffer, I suffer with them. Like I
Mm,
feel the need to help them or something. But it is how he explains it to me is like he doesn't pretty much understand for what I have seen is because of his privilege. He
mm-hmm,
doesn't understand the situations where he has been, but he tried to empathize to the point where he's trying to understand where these people is coming from.
mm-hmm,
I think in this case that's how we apply. Him trying to understand and like understand where you're coming from. What if that happened to me? Like in the last chapter, the one before, he talks about I didn't realize about having like what woman go through until I
mm,
have daughters and I start thinking about it. Once you apply it to yourself or think about what would it happen, or like with me, I think about sometimes what if that person was my son?
mm-hmm.
Also, like, and I think that's what it is here. I
Yeah,
might be wrong, but that's
thanks
how
for
I see
no,
it.
thanks for sharing. I think there was a lot of valid things. D, Annabelle, do you want to weigh in?
I think that empathy is definitely putting yourself in someone else's shoes, but there's the way that he describes it. It's more so, I like the idea that Jessica brings about this idea of humility, empathy and humility, recognizing that I cannot always be in your shoes. So, for example, with the president and his recent executive orders,
Mm-hmm,
I I can understand someone else feeling the pain, the anxiety that comes, being told, well, your naturalization doesn't matter, and we're going to deport you somewhere else. I can understand intellectually, I can feel their pain, but I can definitely hold space, as you said, for that individual to feel their pain with them. And I think that's why I brought up the idea of compassion in terms of having this fellowship, this practiced fellowship with the other individual, if you will. I think that Ben McBride, he emphasizes that idea that, we cannot always, and it's important to recognize that we cannot always I don't think that we can always empathize with someone. I think that that's what he was saying. We can definitely have sympathy for someone. We cannot always empathize for someone in various instances that they're going through. And in that case, the idea of taking a step back and learning and being with them, that is the key process that, I don't know, I think that that's what he was discussing. But
as I was listening to you guys, I just had a thought that, because we learn about the difference between sympathy and empathy, just words, right? But I just had a thought that maybe sympathy is more about listening, and empathy is about saying, I see you. Like as in I may not understand everything, like I not exactly what you're going through, but I see you as a individual person with this experience and this feelings that comes with it, thoughts that come with it, and I see you and I honor you. I recognize you. Like I see you as this valuable human being with everything that you are going through right now. I don't know if that's making sense, but
no, it does make sense.
I don't know if did I read it here or did I read it in one of my books? Was it here where it talked about I don't know if it was here, but where I exist because you see me. Did we talk about this? Right, we did, right? Yeah. Where did I see? Yeah. Anyway, yeah, that thought just came to me.
Yeah. So I can understand the need for trying to be empathetic and even trying to be a bridge builder for those who are persecuted and prevented and persecuted. I get that. The thing that I was struggling with is what's the responsibility of someone who is involved in bridge building, whether they are the bridge builder or whether they are brought to the bridge building table, for the individual who we perceive as powerful and privileged. I asked the question because I too was very perturbed by some of the president's executive orders and the ramifications of those, and and I'm not afraid to say I disagree, and I have strong opinions about them. However, I found myself obviously reading this book this week and having the president made those executive orders all at the same time, is stuff's going on in my head. I found myself asking myself the question, all right, so what does it mean to empathize with the president? What does it mean to is that my responsibility? Because I found myself asking myself the question of, is the expectation for me to think that he has justified in his mind, justified reasons for the betterment of the country and others. And the reason why I asked that question is because I can't help but admit to myself that I think he doesn't care about people. And so how do I'm just kind of wrestling with that right now, because there is definitely a call for the powerful and the privileged to see the persecuted and the prevented. I'll quote on page 69. It says this: still, I believe placing the responsibility for bridging on the persecuted and prevented, especially in certain contexts, can be an act of violence if unintended. Those with more power and privilege should carry the burden of bridging, and restorative justice often may play a role in bridging. I wonder if he's trying to say that the prevented and the persecuted do not need to bridge.
Well, yes, I mean when you hear him say colorblind, I mean he's basically negating the idea that there is the persecuted and there's this class of persecuted and those that need to be prevented. That's what he's doing, or this idea that everything is going to be merit based and there's no need for affirmative action. There is no need to protect the persecuted. There's no need to protect those who need to be prevented, or who need to have
access
bridges, access built around them. I think that for me, at least, that is what really caused me to feel as though this is not just a slight. This is something that I felt targeted in a way. It almost reminded me of like an active war, if you will, against certain people. Me being in that group of people.
Yeah. I definitely resonate with that. Yeah. Dee, Jessica, any thoughts?
Your question was, do the persecuted
And the
and prevented not have any responsibility in bridging? Is that what you're asking?
I think I'm asking a question around that.
So you're asking, do they have responsibility in that process?
Responsibility, expectation do you think the call there's something for them to do in the whole process of bridging?
I think there is something to do, because if they don't speak up, right? I think that this world is set up so that the powerful and the privileged can just go their merry way and ignore the whole persecuted and the prevented, and just live their life as if everything's fine. So I do believe that the persecuted, and that's been the history, right? It's been the history. I mean, isn't that how the whole civil movement started, right? It's this whole idea of, well, we had enough. I had enough, right? I'm gonna speak up. I'm not gonna continue to live this way or let this happen for myself, for my future generation. I think that is a responsibility that they have. But I do agree in this book that says the powerful and the privileged must take a lead in building that bridge, because they can make the changes. I mean, ultimately, sad as it is, they have to get involved to make changes that's going to be hopefully lasting.
Right.
That's not just like a Band-Aid job for that short period of time. But
It's interesting how the individuals that he speaks about in the book start with the bridge. So Jabari says, for example, you're going to be the one to help me,
Oh yeah.
right? You're going to help me.
Mm.
Or the individual that he was speaking to with HIV, you know, the man says, "Hey, you know,
Mm.
I want to let you know that, I'm a gay man and, I have been exposed to HIV." And there are different ways of asking
Mm.
or saying, I need help.
But those are clear initiations.
Right, right. But it was interesting because there is a burden.
Mm.
There is a burden of saying, "Hey, I'm going to teach you. I'm going to communicate to you. I'm going to, yes, I have to do my own advocacy here, but
Mm.
I have to also do my own teaching to you
Mm.
about, how to be empathetic, how to stand in this with me." And it is a burden.
Mm. Oh, you mentioned something that was really quite powerful. On one hand, McBride talks about the idea of if we have an expectation for the prevented and the persecuted to step forward and advocate for themselves, it's kind of almost, I think he says, an act of violence. But at the same time, the powerful and the privileged don't always see how the persecuted and the prevented are experiencing life. And sometimes it requires someone to advocate for themselves and say, you're going to help me. And I think it requires just a holistic stance of humility to listen when someone is trying their best to either advocate themselves or tell it in any kind of way possible. And that's not always easy. I'm, you know, I sometimes wonder when I look at how I see the imbalance between male and female, and I wonder why. Sometimes I feel like it takes the voice of one woman to equate to the voice of 10. No, yeah, it takes 10 men to equate. No, I said it the wrong way around. It takes 10 women to equate to the voice of one man. That's what I want to say. I sometimes feel like it's almost that for it to be taken seriously. And I feel like it takes a lot for the powerful and the privileged to just take a step off the pedestal and for a moment, he says it, just shut up and listen. And just listen. Um, yeah, and I struggle with recognizing my power and my privilege sometimes in the space of those who are prevented and persecuted.
Is there a time where you felt as though you made a faux pas, if you will?
So in my ministry, I meet all kinds of people who experience all kinds of things. I think there have been instances where I have met some people who are I don't want to release details, but let me say this: I've met individuals who have been abused, and I can remember times where I exhibited rescuer complex, whereby, and now I looking back on this, I can recognize this. I look down on them to the point that if I am able to rescue them, it would validate me.
Mm.
And make me feel, oh, I'm a good guy, I'm a good pastor. I'm rescuing, I'm saving, and it's taken me a while to try and just sit with that and recognize um, my only focus here is me, and it's not actually the other person. I'm not stopping, not listening, and I'm not taking my time to recognize, no, 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 forget you, Sam. This person actually is experiencing something. Shut up and listen.
Mm.
And I've walked away from many instances like that where I've had to do some honest reflection to realize, you know, uh, we need to do some humility work, Sam. Yeah.
Mm.
So
That's a very honest
Mm-hmm.
perspection. That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's as real as it is.
Yeah.
And
Um,
you're not alone there. I have been in situations. I'm currently working in therapy about my savior complex
Mm-hmm.
and wanted to jump in and fix and do things and all that stuff and fix the other person and what they're going through.
mm,
And I'm working on, instead of jumping in and trying to be a savior, take a step back and just be a companion to their progress,
yeah, I like that word, companion.
and just be like, I cannot jump in to save you, but I am here for you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I've been there, and it's where like I have to remind myself, you need to take a step back, sit, stay
Mm-hmm.
still, and just be there.
Right.
It's interesting because kind of like you, Jessica and Sam, I feel the same way because there are often times where I feel like I'm working harder than my client. And it's not because my client is just, being lazy or something like that. It's because I'm trying to validate myself, if you will.
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
And, I have to ask myself, am I working harder than my client? Maybe they're not ready to go there, wherever there is, in
mm,
terms of healing just yet.
yep.
Or maybe they don't want me to be that person in their
Mm.
healing process just yet.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. You unleashed a whole heap of can of worms in my head. The amount
Mm.
of times I've met someone and in my head, and even how it's manifested, you need this, 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 and this. That's what you need.
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to diagnose you. I'm going to put the plan in. I'm going to say, this is what you need. Everything will be fine if you just do this, 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 and this. And you are so, so right. The humility of bridge building is recognizing that they are allowed to have their own journey.
Yeah.
No matter how, in your judgmental opinion, slow it is, um, closed minded it is, whatever,
Yeah.
which is, I think this supports the biblical mandate of what it means to be a bridge builder, in that, in the art and work of bridge building, we are not the healers and we are not the ones who fix.
This conversation is reminding me of an instance I remember when I was, I think, 10 or 11. And I think I was 2 years into this country. We had just come up from Jamaica. I think this was about a year or two
Mm,
being in the country. And the school decided to do some sort of multicultural exercise. And during the exercise, the the teachers were called to hold hands, and we all held hands, and the students, we all held hands and share in their own experience of being biased or, ways in which they needed to improve in terms of, how they understood race or how they needed to improve as teachers in seeing other, kids.
You were
I
you were
remember,
10?
yeah, it was about 10 or 11.
I'm surprised this exercise. Anyway, go on. This is fascinating.
And, I'm holding my teacher's hand, this white guy next to me, and he's, crying and sharing and what have you. And I'm looking and I'm like, I felt taken advantage of because I wasn't ready to have that conversation.
Mm,
And I remember thinking, I want to sneak off and go because you didn't ask me for my permission.
mm,
You didn't ask me for my permission to do this healing exercise with you.
mm,
And I remembered it uh, as I was reading this book, the chapter, because it really touched me in terms of how intimate this concept of bridge building is.
mm,
And asking permission is absolutely necessary.
mm,
Whether it's asking permission or recognizing that the other person's giving you permission.
mm. Yeah. There was there was a statement I wanted to read which kind of helped me really understand how sacred the work of bridge building is. Page 75. Bridging is less like winning someone over to your way. It's more like dying and being born again.
Mm, mhm,
Mm-hmm.
mhm, mhm,
Gosh, there's so much in that.
mhm, mhm,
It's I remember when I was listening to the audiobook and he would say that the first thing that came to my mind was this deconstructing your ideas, your bias, like what you've been taught so far. Pretty much it felt like that, deconstruction on your
Mhm.
mindset. When he said that, I was like, oh, that feels like
Mm.
we need to start all over again. We need to start reprogramming our brains again on how we see these things.
Mm.
That's how I felt, and I really, really, really did like that part of the chapter.
Mm.
It resonated with me.
Mm.
and based on what it just, how Christ came back and, and how revolutionary what he was doing, in these communities
Mm.
that had essentially built a
Barriers.
wall in a way.
Hmm. Yep.
There was no opportunity to,
Mm.
say there were opportunities, but I mean, the opportunities were so specific, if you will,
Hmm.
in, how to reach in and to build a bridge. Um, I think about how the religion had become that important, and the religion created the barrier, if you will, in terms of how to build a bridge. There was a wall, which was the religion itself.
Yeah. I wonder if anyone could, if you had to ask McBride a question after this chapter, does anybody have a question that they would probably like to ask the author?
I said this before we started the meeting, and I'll say it again. How do you keep going when you find resistance from others? How do you take care of your mental health when you do social justice work?
Mm.
Because it drains you and it takes a toll on you. How do you what does inspire you to keep going, to keep growing, to keep learning when there's so much, when you have encountered situations where people push back. That's one of the things that I would love to ask. I would love to know.
Yeah.
How?
There's a quote right at the end of the book, which I think relates to this answer and might steer us in some direction. 76 and 77. If you are among the powerful or privileged, you might be thinking, what will I lose if I actually engage and begin to bridge with those who are persecuted and prevented? This is the wrong question. As the powerful and the privileged, you should ask yourself, what will I stand to gain? I think one of the things that could help us at least think about keeping going is what we pick up along the way of this work, how it impacts our faith experience, our human experience. I think your question is so valid because we all understand and have experienced being exhausted. Mm-hmm. We all know what that feels like in some way, fashion, or form. And I think one of the things that keeps us going, at least as a Christian, I think, is the recognition that God is in the continual process of pouring into my life every single day. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And enriching my life every single day, despite the challenges, the pushback, the resistance, you fill in the blanks. I definitely, I don't think that answers all your question, Jessica. I think there's still a lot more, but I think that's a hint at least. Yeah. Anyone else? Final thoughts or a question that you want to pose to McBride, or maybe a takeaway?
I will say that I recognize that I become triggered when I give up my power. And so I don't, as in to say, I don't like giving up my power. And there is a fear in stepping back and not doing anything because I feel as though I'm giving up my power. And my privilege. Maybe that's not the case, but in my mind, it's almost equate to that.
Do you mind if I ask you just to try and color that in a bit more? What's the worst that could happen? What goes on?
If I give up, so for example, if I give up my power, as in to say, so if I do not speak, if I do not tell you what you need to do, then in my mind, it is equivalent to silencing my voice.
Okay.
And so,
yeah.
I would wonder, how do you work through that process of overcoming your own racial trauma or gender trauma, if you will?
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Dee, any thoughts you'd like to share?
I was just thinking that I don't even think the question of what will I stand to gain is the question. I feel like if in this work, if you focus on what you can gain from it, I think you're gonna get very disappointed very quick. Because I think the chapter also talked about how even though you're engaging in this bridge building and all this, you may not really see the result in your lifetime. And if you go into this work focused on what am I going to get out of this,
Yes.
oh, I think you're going to burn out so quick. I think it has to, I think the reason why the book says that we what was the word, we the bridging is more like not winning somebody over but dying and being reborn, is because I think, like we talked about it, right? You need to have such humility. I think that you really do need to let your ego go, put that to the side, and you're more focused on the people. And you almost feel like you have to be working. You really have to be the bridge and work from both sides, the prevented and the persecuted, the powerful and the privileged, being in that middle and being really be able to, again, I use the word, what did I use, the being the mediator. And if you really look at that work process, it's not that you gaining something, but it's really for the whole party to gain something out of it. And yeah, it's just you can't do this kind of work with your ego in the forefront. Just not possible.
Can I just say something? It's very interesting because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, who's a psychoanalyst, and we were talking about this idea of the ego, the psyche. We protect ourselves with various defenses, and it's very self-centered. The ego is very self-centered, and intentionally so. We protect ourselves, through our defenses, whether it's projection, humor, what have you. And so we get stuck, like you said, in the weeds of, me. There is no opportunity for the humility to stretch your hand out to that other person, to have that fellowship with another person.
And I think that must be the sacrifice that we need to make, right? The sacrifice is to let go of our ego. That's one of the biggest sacrifice.
And that's the process. That's a process. Wow.
Of becoming.
Probably why Paul says, die to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to add something very quickly. What I think I understood the question wrong, because in my brain it processes like, what do you take from this chapter? And I was thinking and I was writing down that the thing that I get from this chapter, it is something that I have talked with my kids about, advocating for autism and IEPs at school. And it is the same here when we're doing social justice, that this work takes time. And we might not see the results right now. And he talks about it during this chapter. But at the end of the day, what I told my kids, it's worth doing it because it might not create the change right now, but the future generations are gonna benefit from them. Like I told Amir, there's people with autism that in the past advocated and fight for the rights and the accommodations you have now. And when he talked about it during the chapter about talking about the Civil War and all the stuff and all the other stuff, it got me thinking about that. Yeah, it is true. We might not see it right now, but it will benefit the future generations. I don't know if it makes sense. That's what I wanted to add.
My favorite, okay, so Marcus Garvey, he started the civil rights movement along with W.E.B. Du Bois. Marcus Garvey is a Jamaican man. His statement, emancipate yourself from mental
slavery.
And I mean, that was the start of such a movement
Mm.
for it doesn't matter who you are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's not here to, appreciate it, but I
Mm.
mean, come on, you know.
Yeah. Yep. Oh man, there's so much we could talk about. We've got to finish. But yeah, it's this beautiful kingdom fight for humanity and not for necessarily ourselves. That's what Jesus just emanates through and through. He really does. I have to bring things to an end. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me, and thank you online for following with us. This has been another episode of Pages to Progress. We have been going through the book Trouble in the Water by Ben McBride. If you want any information about the book, everything's in the description. We're asking you to follow our journey with us. We're asking for you to engage and connect in the comment section. We hope that this has been fruitful and a blessing to you. But until next week, may you be blessed, and you can join us for our next episode where we were looking at chapter 4, Confront Your Biases. All right then. God bless you. Take care.